Hello. We want to welcome you to a brave new world, virtual onboarding. My name is Jen Goad. I'm the Senior Director of EEO and Regulatory Compliance for Charter Communications. Joining me today is Chad Prosser, Senior Program Manager with Cox Enterprises, and Chance Cassidy, Vice President, Employee Services Center with Charter Communications. Before we get started with our session, I want to remind everyone of the chat feature on the right side of your screen. You can use this to communicate with other attendees and to post your questions. We will designate a Q&A at the end of the session, but please feel free to post your questions throughout the session. Okay, let's get started. As we all know, there's a lot of activity that occurs when an offer is extended and hopefully accepted. We want to focus our discussion on after the offer acceptance. We'll discuss the onboard process and the changes that were implemented due to COVID. You will see with Charter and Cox the different onboarding processes. When onboarding starts, when onboarding ends, and the steps in between. Chance, will you kick us off and introduce us to James and walk us through the onboarding process for Charter?
Absolutely. Thank you, Jen. Hello, everybody. Great to be with you today. So just wanted to talk you through our process that we use here at Charter when we're onboarding a new employee. So my team really takes over the onboarding process after the offer has been accepted. So I would argue that the onboarding process does begin earlier than that with the recruiting team. But my function really is, our team's function really is the process once they've accepted that offer in our applicant tracking system. What that does is it automatically kicks off our integrations with our background check and drug screening provider to begin those processes. Once those results are back, and assuming the employee is eligible, so James gets positive results as far as the background check goes, and he's eligible to start, those statuses load back into our applicant tracking system, and again, automatically kind of kicks off our onboard process. So what that does is it kicks out an offer, not an offer, a welcome letter to James. So he gets a welcome letter saying welcome to Charter and a link to begin his onboarding in the onboard system. In that system, he can fill out his forms and agreements and personal information, so direct deposit, I-9 information, company policies, signing off that he has acknowledged and read those things. Once he completes that onboarding process in the system, all those tasks are completed. It's going to automatically pick up his record and pass it over to our HR system. So the record will load into our HR system. Once it loads into HR system, that system then connects directly with our networking ID side of things. So he gets a network ID. And from that side, his supervisor is notified of his network ID. He's notified that he's got that ID. They can start provisioning equipment. So get him a laptop, get him a workspace, any other devices or equipment he needs to do his job as a field tech. And he is officially ready to start. So that would allow the hiring manager and him to start working together, getting ready, prepared for day one.
Thank you for walking us through that, Chance. So at that point, is that when onboarding, the responsibility of your team ends?
Yeah, so my team will monitor the whole process from front to start there, from start to end with the onboarded candidate, but they'll also continue past that in the I-9 side of things. So I-9 begins with his entry of information into the onboard system, and then through the third day of hire, we have to make sure we have him eligible and right to work in the U.S. So our team monitors that I-9 process, but we also are engaged if there's any changes in his data prior to that start date, right? So he might get into our system a week or two before his hire date, but maybe his supervisor changes, or maybe his start date has to change, and my team is involved in that process as well, as far as changing that data in those different systems as he loads into the HR side. So essentially, we're done. We say we're done after the person has moved into our HR system, but we're still technically involved until we make that clean handoff actually at his day one and beyond with the I-9 piece.
Excellent. Thank you, Chance.
Absolutely.
Chad, when does onboarding begin with Cox?
It's interesting. I really have enjoyed working with Chance, preparing for this conference because we've really learned about our different processes. Uh, I think it's similar. If, in fact, as I heard Chance, I'm listening to the different teams that touch new hires. And as we looked at it at Cox, there are so many different teams that touch new hires, and each of these teams would probably describe onboarding in a different way. I sit on the employee engagement team, and our whole focus is how do we create a great experience for the employee. And so we look at it from accepted offer, like Chance does. So we're at that point, we've got now who is the person filling this role. There are teams that kind of move the person through the process, much like what we just saw with Charter. Our team is focused on what happens not only when you get here, but after that. So our goal has really been about we have an employment brand, like what it means to work for Cox. Recruiting is selling that brand to candidates, and our team is delivering that brand. So how do we show that we are the company that we just sold to you? And you'll see here, our whole focus has been from fire hose to fountain. So most orientations, if you will, or onboarding sessions are all this content right up front. And to be honest, your new hires aren't remembering a thing. They're more likely to remember how they felt at the end of that first day or first week. So we've broken ours up into bite-size chunks, just-in-time content for our new hires that gives them a much easier transition into the company. You'll see here at the bottom of the slide, I've got a couple of experiences. So we've got in-person campus experiences. That's really of a campus orientation. What's here on this campus? How do you get your badge? All that stuff. We take care of that for new hires. We also have virtual enterprise and divisional onboarding sessions. So I work for Cox Enterprises, which is headquarters. We have two divisions, Cox Communications, the cable division, and also Cox Automotive. So we have virtual sessions for everybody, and then divisional sessions based on your division. We also added communication. So everybody would approach us and say, hey, you've got new hires. Can you make sure to tell them this? Well, rather than tell them all that on the first day, we have broken all that content over time. So we have like an email campaign, if you will. It starts before they start in preboarding. Once they're cleared for hire, it starts. And then it goes all the way to 1 year anniversary, which is a happy anniversary email. It starts pretty heavy at the front every day, and then it goes to weekly for about 3 months, and then it waits until your anniversary. So we're really excited about this. We've had some really great feedback on the program.
That is great. Thank you for walking us through that.
And Chad gets credit for having a cooler slide than mine with that fire hose to fountain shrink.
So we walked through the process for both Cox and Charter, and now COVID hits. Now we have to quickly think of change, yet trying to continue to hire and maintain business continuity. This is a visual we probably can all relate to. It's how do we work through COVID? So Chance, what prompted, one, were there changes that needed to occur once COVID hit, and what prompted the change?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll just say, by the way, that I can't change a tire with a car sitting down, let alone on 2 wheels. So these guys are impressive. But from a business standpoint, we felt like we had to do kind of the same thing, right? So the process we have in getting people in the door and started for day one hit a road bump with COVID, obviously. So some things started to change in our world where we started hearing from our recruiters saying, hey, what's going on? What's happening in your world? How come these people aren't getting through the door as quick as they were before? And what was happening was drug screening facilities were being closed because they were focusing on testing for COVID, right? So that impacted us. And then we also had changes on the background check side where courts that were normally responding to us within a couple of days were not getting back to us because they were ended up being closed because of COVID. So in situations where we have systems that are responding on the background check side for states that use a system, we didn't feel an impact. But for those states where we have to go and actually have our background check provider go to the court to get a response, if that court was closed, obviously it was causing a delay on our side. So we started to look at the background check and the drug screening side of things and figure out, do we really need to do all the things that we're doing in these things, or can we alter the way we're doing some of these things to continue to move the process forward while still making sure we have our checks in place. So we looked at the background or drug screening side first and really talked about the groups that need to have a drug screen, frankly, to be here. So we started pulling that together and saying, is it possible to hire somebody without them completing a drug screen? And then we also looked on the background check side and said, if there's just that one court that we're waiting on that's closed due to COVID, is there a way for us to move the candidate through the system and start them contingently, continuing to follow up that process on the back end, but then at least allowing the candidate to come in the door as a new hire and then finishing off that background check process on the back end. And again, that assumes that the candidate didn't have any admitted criminal when they applied for the job, and that we didn't have any findings in all the other searches that we did or that were already completed as part of their background check. So those couple of things were things that we started looking at and changing due to COVID, because we had to make some alterations in our plan.
Thank you. So as you walked us through your process, there were a lot of touch points with a new hire. How challenging was it in this environment now to stay connected to that new hire and maintain that relationship as you move them through the process?
Yeah, I think one of the good things about our process was that we provide a service, right, for the entire organization with Charter, right? So we support all the business units already, and we do that essentially virtually already. So we as a team, my team is monitoring candidates through the process of background check and drug, and we were helping them schedule drug screening where those things got more difficult, and we wanted to make sure we were continuing to move folks through the process. So when we started making some changes to the process, one of the things we saw is it was more important for us to stay connected with the candidate, making sure they were completing their onboarding timely, because the longer they kind of sat out there, opportunities existed for other companies through the COVID. As you saw there, the larger job market and folks had more opportunities, that we wanted to make sure they were continuing with us as quickly as possible, so that they weren't going somewhere else and we were losing that candidate we wanted to hire. So that was a lot of the focus from our recruiting side, specifically right on, hey, can we make sure we keep this moving along here throughout this process so we don't lose somebody else to another organization.
Thank you. Thank you for walking us through that. Chad, we'll turn to you. And what prompted some of the changes that you implemented at Cox?
It's interesting. We described the program just a moment ago, but really we were building the program in 2019 and 2020. So each of the divisions, I mentioned we have, 2 divisions, they may have had their own onboarding. It may not have even been consistent across the division. So our real focus was, how do we create an experience that's the same across all of Cox? And we were building that 2019 into 2020. And the whole program was really built about in-person, on-campus experience. And that was the idea, and we were going to launch it in Atlanta, where our headquarters are, and then roll it out to the field. When COVID hit, like many of you guys, I'm sure we thought this will be just a couple of weeks. Let's just hunker down and we'll launch as soon as it's over. But as it kept dragging on, we finally had to ask ourselves, what would onboarding look like if location didn't matter? And that was such a great question for us, because it really had us rethink the whole thing. So we already had the content. We already knew what we wanted to do, and we had to split it up to say what is really location specific information and what is enterprise specific information. That helped us redesign the program. So we were able to launch in 2020 with a virtual program first, and then as we started going back to campus, we were able to add the in-person pieces.
Excellent. And were there any challenges that you faced? Understanding you were already in motion with change, but keeping that new hire engaged?
Yeah, that's interesting. I've been in training for 30 years now, and I've been in it so long that I know how to engage an audience in a room, but I have fought off virtual training forever. I just thought this is not an effective way, but we had no choice. And so we had to go through, as I mentioned, we had the content, but all of our activities were all done in person, in a room, at a table. And we had to rethink, how do you do this if it was in a platform? What platform are we going to use? That's going to dictate what you can actually do. So the challenges really became about what technology can we use to create the most engaging sessions. I will give you this feedback, folks. If you're building something, whoever's doing the most work is doing the most learning and having the most fun and the most engaged. And so one simple tweak to any program is to think, who's doing the work here? Is a presenter talking, or is the audience doing something? And it's easy to flip that content, but that's exactly how we built ours, was how do we get the new hire doing stuff every time they're with us? And the challenge was, how do you do that virtually?
Excellent. Thank you for walking us through this. So thank you both for sharing the change that was implemented. let's take a step back. So when you were considering change, again, in your case, Chad, it was before COVID. Chance, COVID kind of drove some of the changes that you were implementing. But let's talk about the process. If someone wanted to implement change to their current program, where do they start? What was the process, the steps that you took, and who did you involve in that? So Chad, I'm going to turn it back to you to walk us through understanding yours started pre-COVID, but how did the discussions begin and what steps did you take?
Ours started as one project in a broader initiative. And that initiative was, how do we create a similar employee experience across all of Cox? Cox is a really large organization, about 50,000 employees. So how do we create the same experience no matter where you are in the organization? And there were lots of things that spun up from that. One of those projects was the onboarding process. Now, what's interesting is all of them use the same process, and that is a human-centered design principles. And if you're not familiar with that, it really is about, instead of coming up with the ideas in a vacuum, it is really listening to the stakeholders, who are all the folks impacted by this program. And so for us, that meant interviewing current new hires, candidates, in hiring managers, all of the onboarding partners that we talked about earlier today, like IT and the ES employee service centers and that kind of stuff. It was a really long process doing that, but we worked with all of our divisional partners and with all of our stakeholders to determine, in every moment, what do people expect, and in every moment, what would dazzle them. And also, the part I didn't love was what would be a detractor. But that part was less important to me. It was like, how do you give them what they expect and then turn it up one notch? And by doing that, if you do that all the way through, you create really great programs. That's how we did it.
Excellent. Thank you. So one additional question before we turn it over to Chance is, how long from the time you started the discussion until implementation, how long did it take?
I think because we had to ask so many stakeholders, it took longer than I might have expected. What's interesting, though, with human-centered design, we did this exercise in the class where the best design really was asking the stakeholder, and we had to do something. We were all coming up with ideas very quickly, but they were not the best ideas. And there was an interesting exercise to really show us that. So that time probably took all the way through, I would guess, a year or so, maybe less, but almost a year of work, really hard work, but definitely worth it. And that was just really getting the feedback from all of those stakeholders that took so much time.
And then did you have to speed up the process when COVID hit to implement sooner rather than waiting?
Well, what's interesting is it was less about starting from scratch. It was really about changing the delivery method, if you think about it. I mean, we already had the program built, but the program was built for in-person. So it was really like, how do you now flip this to be a virtual experience? But that took less time, probably 2 months. And the hardest part was figuring out which platform can we use that will work for all of our new hires. How do we do this when they don't have their credentials yet? There was all sorts of that kind of nuanced stuff. How do we create engagement in this platform? Does it allow for polls and for any kind of activities like that? So that was really more of the challenge, was figuring out the right platform. Once we had that, it was pretty easy to get it knocked out.
Excellent. Thank you for walking us through that. Chance, I'm going to turn it over to you. What were the steps that you took with implementing change within Charter's process?
Yeah, it was definitely a force kind of upon us to kind of look at what was happening in our onboard process, as far as specifically around the background check and drug screening side of things. So on the drug screening side, when facilities started closing, we started looking at, okay, what are we doing here and why are we doing it type thing. So we really started pulling numbers and looking at who failed background checks and not background checks, who failed drug screens specifically, to see what the fallout was and if there was a possibility of moving forward without doing the drug screening for a period of time. So we initially thought, again, like I said, COVID, we thought was going to be a short-lived thing. Obviously, we were wrong. So we decided we could kind of move the process forward by not requiring a drug screen, right, for a lot of our roles. Now, the other part of that is we have field techs, right, people going into customer homes. So we didn't remove drug screening for the field tech roles. Initially, we just said, let's look at changing the rest of the organization. So we suspended the drug screening piece of it. And then on the background check side, we did put that process in place to allow contingent starts for non-field tech roles. So again, if you're in a field tech role where you're going into a home or a business, you still had to have your background check fully completed before you could come on board. But for the other roles, we said, okay, is there a reason why we can't have you start? If there's just one courthouse that's remaining, you have no other findings, right? Can we look at that? So we started that process, but we had to engage all of our stakeholders, much like Chad was talking about, right? So that's all the different VPs of HR for the different lines of business, the recruiting team, obviously the talent acquisition team was heavily involved in this process because they, that's their candidates that they're trying to get hired. And then we worked very closely with legal, with our EVP of HR, with my current leader, the GVP over benefits and my ESC group, and our risk team and security group, and said, okay, what if we do this? What's it going to look like? So that's what we did. We involved all those folks. We had some discussions, but we did it pretty quickly because our hands were kind of forced here with COVID. So within a couple of weeks, we started the discussion probably end of March, and by the early part of April, we had suspended drug screening for all candidates except for the field techs out of the gate. And as we moved forward into COVID a little bit longer, right? So it started to be obvious that wasn't necessarily going away. We were still in COVID, but in the fall of then 2022 or 2020, we decided, okay, let's go ahead and put the drug screen back in place for our driving roles, but we still kept it as it was for the other roles as we continued through COVID at that point. So some flex in what we were doing, but we still decided to not put that drug screening in place for the other roles, and it allowed us to kind of keep those candidates moving, knowing on the back end we had other avenues to do drug screening, right? So if we have reasonable suspicion, somebody sees something that might make you think that somebody needs to be tested, we can go and have them tested after they're hired on the back end. Same thing, post-accident testing didn't leave our process as well. So those things are still in place, but that's kind of the steps we took and the process we looked at. And who we engaged, which was a lot of folks, but we made some pretty quick decisions in that summer months there in 2020.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you for walking us through that. It's amazing how fast that you could move forward with implementation. So when we look to the future and we think about the lessons learned through these changes, one, and Chad, we'll go back to you, is what changes were implemented that are working that you're going to continue to retain even when we're on the other side of this?
That's a great question. I said earlier, I do not like virtual training, and I have held that position ever since they said that's the new wave of the future. But interestingly now, I love it. What I realized about our virtual sessions, like right now we're back on campus. One of the sessions we do is a quarterly meeting with our CEO. So the CEO meets with a quarter's worth of new hires. We've had an event like that for the 15 years I've been with the company, but it has been Atlanta focused. So the folks in Atlanta, where our headquarters are, got that experience. But now that we've been doing it virtually, every one of my new hires, regardless of where you sit, gets a front row seat with our CEO. And so he's even asked me recently, like, hey, are we going to put these back to on campus? And I said, no, I want to keep a front row seat for every one of our new hires. So it's really leveled the playing field for the experience, for every new hire to feel that same connection to the experience, regardless of where you sit. So now I'm a believer. I am certainly a believer. I think there's a time for both, but I love our virtual sessions. So my intent is to keep those going, and I'm even looking for more ways to add the virtual pieces to our new hire experience.
Excellent. That's great. So let's do the flip side. Was there anything that was implemented that you're not going to retain? It just didn't work well.
Oh, that's a great question. I don't know that well, maybe I'm a Pollyanna, but I can't think of something right now. In my mind, I think I like it so much that I don't really want to change it. I think that the work that we have still, though, is what does the in-person experience look like? So this isn't necessarily what I would change, but I realize that there are places that have a lot of people that start on the same day, and that's easy to create an experience. And there are some locations that may have one person starting today. What we haven't figured out that I really would like to figure out is what does that in-person experience look like for that one person? Do we build a playbook? Is it up to the manager? Is there someone else kind of responsible for that experience? I do know that is a much harder thing to do. So it's not necessarily what would I change. It's like, what do we still have yet to do? And that is to build this in-person experience for our one person hire in an office.
And you just answered the last question I was going to. It's when you start to think about these are the changes that we've made. Are we starting to reevaluate or look at other new processes? And you just answered that in the other things that you're currently continuing to look at.
Yeah,
that's great. Chance, let's talk about lessons learned. What's worked well? What are we going to retain at Charter?
Yeah, so honestly, there was a lot of concern, if you will, or trepidation around the front end piece on the drug screening side around, well, can we do this? What if we don't drug screen our candidates? What's that going to do to our hiring pool? And we're going to have a problem post hire. And we haven't really seen it, right? So we've been tracking the metrics pretty closely. Our fallout rate, pre-COVID was around 3%, a little less than 3%, and it still continued to be that with a smaller population. But we haven't really had a problem with the hires that we bring in that way, and haven't seen a spike in post-accident or reasonable suspicion drug testing. So we've with the changes that we've made, we're looking to keep those in place. We also are looking at, with changes in the landscaping of the states and laws around marijuana. We've started looking at, is marijuana something we need to look at and maybe remove from our panel or change the way we test for it. We haven't done anything there yet. We have had several discussions, and we continue to look at that. And then the changes we put in place on the background check side, as far as the contingent starts, as the courts opened back up, we basically went back to our normal process. However, we did keep the contingent start process in place for those folks that were fully cleared. Again, if you're not in customer homes or not, on business premises. So we are allowing folks to start on a contingent basis if everything else is clear. Like I said, so we do all of our checks and we're just waiting for one courthouse that hasn't come back to us yet. We will allow that employee to start, and we worked with our vendor partner to put a process in place to make sure we're tracking those, right? So it's not a spreadsheet, right? We don't have to manage a spreadsheet on the back end. We actually have a system set up so that as part of the system, they go into this other bucket. We have reporting capabilities and access to it to monitor it every day when we get reports. So we are keeping that in place as well. So far, so good. And we've received good feedback as far as the changes that we've made in the business, supporting them and helping, kind of keep the process moving and getting folks hired in the door.
That's excellent. So similar question, is there anything that was implemented that you're not going to move forward with that just didn't work well?
No, much like Chad, we do everything right. No, so we haven't seen. I say no. We still look at it, right? We've been pretty closely watching everything that we do in that space, and making sure that what changes we made are getting us the results that we wanted, and also not causing any problems for us down the road. So so far so good. Doesn't mean we won't change that. You could ask me 2 weeks from now and we might have changed all of it. But for right now, I think the processes that we've put in place are working, and we seem to be moving in a good direction overall. The only thing I would say is, in discussions with Chad, right, and I know our company is looking at kind of post offer accept and post day one. So hopefully connecting him with some folks in here at Charter and looking at maybe stealing some of his ideas for Charter going forward and doing the day one retention through year one.
Excellent. Yes. And I'm going to pose a question to both of you in just a moment, but one last question for you, Chance, is that so we've opened the door for change in process as we continue to look towards the future. Is there other areas of focus for consideration of change with the process based on some of the changes you've already implemented?
So we're looking right now at our vendor partners, right, and trying to find the right tools, if you will, for the setup and automation. So we have a lot of automation in place today. We're hoping to keep that as we move forward with different vendors and maybe changes as we go forward, but also allowing the interaction and touch points with our candidates. So our team does a lot of monitoring, right, of the candidates coming through the system. So we are daily looking at the touch points and making sure folks are coming through and moving along in the process. And I don't know if there's anything there specifically that we can alter or move around in the shuffleboard process, if you will, to to get people through the door and keep them more engaged. But yeah, we're always looking at possibilities of moving things. And that's one of the things that our team is always kind of doing, is trying to make change. And I like, I'll go back a few slides to one of Chad's, the just-in-time communication. I think the just-in-time communication touch points are key, making sure that the folks stay engaged throughout the process. So continuing to look at other ways to improve upon what we've put in place, and as we move forward, making it even better than what we have it today.
That's great.
We managed to, I don't like to put this out there all too often because it is a number, right? But we managed to take the time from offer accept to the time that the person moves into our HR system and get it down below 5 days. And even through COVID, that's something that I think our team's pretty proud of. So.
That's excellent. Thank you. So one last question that I was going to, and you both have touched on it throughout the session, where you've learned from each other, understanding that Charter focuses more on the pre-boarding, and Cox focuses more on from day one through the first year. Is there anything that you've learned from each other that you're going to take back to your organizations and continue to expand upon in building out your processes?
I'll take that first,
Yeah,
if you don't
great.
mind, because I never thought about questioning the time from accepted offer to day one. And ours is generally, I would say on average, is about 10 days. It is a arduous process, and it crunches all the rest of the team. So if you're not ready for hire until 3 days before start, everybody else is scrambling to get ready for day one. And I never once thought that we could question that. And I think this time working with Chance really made us wonder, like, why do we do what we do? And is there a way to audit that? So we actually just started, as a result of preparing for this conference and listening to Chance, we have a team auditing our whole moment from accepted offer to ready for hire, to see what are the friction points and why are we doing it and what can we eliminate. So I want to say thank you for having us on this panel, because I really have enjoyed getting to know Chance and learning about the process.
That's great, Chad. Chance, is there anything you would like to share?
Yeah, very similar. And I've obviously enjoyed working with Chad as well on this process, but also knowing that our company is looking at the day one. Like I said, I think getting that group connected with Chad would be extremely beneficial for us, just because our companies have a lot of similarities. And I think the issues that persist in our company probably are what prompted theirs to do the onboarding and from day one through year one connectivity points. And I think that would be something we could benefit from. But the other thing I'll say is, our team is looking at the process overall, but also being flexible as far as offering different options or different solutions for different types of hires, right? So, we work in a shared type environment, right, where we want to have one process for all, but knowing that doesn't always fit everybody, right? So we did change our process, but we didn't change it for everybody, right? We had to have carve outs around certain groups. And I think as much as we try to avoid that, knowing that we have to allow for some of that as well, just to make sure that we're giving the best experience for all the different candidates and different types of roles we have, is something that we're trying to do. So as much as I would love to keep everything standard and be one process, knowing that we have to be flexible and allow for some change and variability in some of those processes is one of the things that we are continuing to try and to kind of solve for, if you will.
Excellent. Well, thank you. Thank you both. It has been a pleasure working with both of you through this session. We want to thank Chance and Chad for the great information that they provided today. At this time, we do want to open it up for the Q&A. Please remember, you have the chat feature to the right side of your screen that you can post your questions, and we look forward to the questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jen. Thank you, Chance.
Wow. Thank you so much, Jen, Chad, Chance. My name is Toria Iannetti. I'm the Director of HR at 5 Broadband, and I will be hosting the Q&A segment of this session. Are you guys ready? We've got some good ones.
I think we are.
Good.
Okay, perfect. So to start, did you address the low-hanging fruit with temporary initiatives while you discovered and designed these programs? Either one of you can respond.
As I think about that, I think that question relates a little bit to what we were doing, which is building this program, but we already had onboarding in different forms all over the company. So we didn't really have to do anything because it already existed in some way. And then we just launched when we were ready.
Awesome. And next we have, what platforms do you use to kind of centralize the program and that create consistent experiences across the board? I think that could apply to both of you, but whoever wants to take it.
Chance, you want to go?
I was gonna say, I think that applies more to you, but I'll do my bit first. I think from a platform standpoint, it is the same across, right? From the preboarding side of things, as far as the applicant tracking system, and then kicking off background check and drug screen, we have the same vendors, and then the same onboard platform is across the entire organization. So we don't have to worry about somebody coming in the door through a different experience on the front end. It's all the same from entry level role all the way up through executive level role. They're all coming through the same process and using the same system. So it does make a consistent process, but it also makes it consistent, easier for us to support all candidates.
Yeah, our choosing a platform was different because we were thinking about the experience, and what we had the challenge was, I think it's easier to teach a platform by being on the platform. So for example, if we use Teams, which our organization does, we should use Teams. The problem was Teams is not enterprise wide at our organization. So we had all these limitations, and you had to be a true employee with an identity. And there's occasions where an employee may start without logins and that kind of stuff. So we went with Zoom. I'm really pleased with that. Not to promote Zoom, but I'm pleased with that platform because it allows us to do breakout rooms. I can have 1,000 people at a time, so we can have as big an audience as we need to have, and you don't have to technically have your Cox credentials to join us. So it really allowed us to allow anybody without any real challenges.
Awesome, thank you. Chase, what is Charter's number of dates from acceptance to day one?
So it even happens in chat. I get Chase on the instead of Chance. I answer to either. But the the number of days, I think what they're saying is what's the number of days it takes from offer accept to day one. So similar to what Chad was mentioning, around 10 to 15 days. We ask for candidates to get into the system and start the process up to 15 days prior to their start date. But the window of time it takes from the offer accepted in the system to them being the candidate then being sent to PeopleSoft, which is our HR system right now, to begin ready for day one is under 5 days right now. So that's average. I mean, we have obviously ones that take longer, and a good number of them take less. But right now we're about 4.5 to 5 in that range.
That's amazing. What was most important to the candidates when you interviewed them about their experience? So Chad, I think this one's more towards you because I know you love getting the feedback about the experience.
Yeah, we use the human-centered design principles, if you're not familiar with that. So just kind of running through human-centered design. So our focus groups, what was most important? I think if you really boiled it down, I mean, everybody has their own answers, but I think it's about, do I have everything I need? Do I feel prepared? I think what we found is new hires feel anxious before they start. So how do we relieve that anxiety? And then how do you make sure they have everything they possibly need to feel productive in the beginning? And so in my mind, that even looks at like what kind of accomplishments can a new hire do each day. And so it's really kind of getting down to feeling productive and feeling like they're a part of the team early on.
Great point. What tools or resources do you provide to the leaders so they engage in the onboarding process? Interesting. So Chance, do the leaders get involved at all prior to start in the pre-screening process, pre-employment process?
If all goes well, typically not. So if this process is working like it's supposed to in the system, the candidate is able to log into the system easily and is be able to complete their paperwork online and fill out their personal information, and my team is there to support and help and answer questions, then typically no, we don't see involvement from the hiring manager at that time. Usually up until they reach the HR system, it's all our team and recruiter that are having the contact with the candidate. We do produce reports though, specifically on the back end around, well, throughout the process. Daily reports are available on where the candidate sits in the process to let people know that they're either still in background check or background is completed and they're still on board at this point, or once they've actually even finished onboarding and or have moved into PeopleSoft. We also have another report where we produce a day, again, daily, that shows when the network ID has been assigned to the candidate coming through. So that's really when that kind of handoff happens, is when they see that, oh, okay, Chance is not only hired, but he's also got a network number, and I can start provisioning systems and badges and all that kind of stuff for him. That's really when that handoff takes off. And I'm guessing that's more when Chad, when your team would get involved on the with you guys on day one forward.
Well, it's interesting. We also try to take the manager out as much as possible. If you think about it, at least historically, we've asked managers to order the equipment. Well, I may hire someone once a year. I don't know how to do this. It becomes complicated. Our IT teams certainly know how to get a computer ready. So we created a bot that would order all equipment at accepted offer. So we've got all this kind of automation, but the manager is, in my opinion, probably the most critical role in onboarding. I mean, they're the ones, people don't stay with companies, they stay with managers. They don't leave companies, they leave managers. And I feel like our goal is to help equip our managers to be great onboarders in terms of relationship, being clear about what's expected of you, what's the job look like, what should I be doing, feedback, all that kind of stuff is what we try to equip our managers to do in the onboarding space.
Wonderful. And I think we have time for maybe one or two more. What about swag and onboarding kits? I know that's a big thing nowadays. Does that make sense from a remote hybrid perspective? I'm gonna give that one to Chad. He's the swag.
I mentioned in the talk that we the way we designed ours, there's an employment brand. So that's the brand promise. What does it mean to be a Cox employee? Recruiters are selling it, we're delivering it. So we have this like whole branded strategy, if you will. And there's several levers we're trying to pull. But one of the things that we do for all of our employees, on your first day, you're invited to go choose your welcome gifts. And we did that because one of our brand promises is your uniqueness is your magic. So how could we choose one gift for everybody when people are all different? And the gifts are intentionally chosen to pull different levers. So one of ours is around technology. So we have technology gifts. We do a lot in the community. So we have like a pet lover's bag, and then we have your wellness is important. So we have a yoga mat and all this stuff. They're all branded with Make Your Mark, which is our kind of purpose statement boiled down into a nice thing. And it comes in the stuff you don't realize you're getting is there's a book inside that has all these stories about the company. And then there's all comes in a box that says Make Your Mark in this beautiful branding. And it's really fun to watch people on LinkedIn opening it. They'll do video openings of the box. But that was really exciting and one of our big deliverables that came out of this project.
It's funny you say that. I was actually going to share. I have a.
Yeah, you have one. Yours is great. Ours doesn't have your name on it.
Yeah, of course not. But it's funny because you're right, on LinkedIn, right? You see all these things now, and go back 2 years ago. How often did you see new employees opening their welcome package or welcome box? And I think people virtually, when you're in a desk and you're coming to an office, right, it was easier just to be like, hey, here's a bag of stuff, or here's a couple of things for you. But now that when it switched to being more remote, and you didn't have a chance to interact directly with somebody, you could package it up and into these nice boxes and mail it and send it. So yeah, they become more prominent.
It's interesting though, Chance. I remember learning this long ago. What dazzles us today becomes an expectation tomorrow. Mm-hmm. And so you're making a very good point that right now, these swag gift boxes, you can dazzle people right now. But I bet in 3 years, if you didn't do a branded swag box, somebody's gonna be like, what have I joined? So we keep having to raise the bar to create these great experiences.
So it sounds a little bit like it's still worth it in terms of the remote employees or high turnover, anything like that. It's definitely worth it because it's just another extension of your brand and who you guys are. Wonderful. So we're just about out of time, I believe. But thank you guys so much for everything. This has been such a fun conversation, and to see both sides of it, the pre-employment piece combined with the post-employment piece with the onboarding. And it's just so important in this day and age with the Great Resignation to really make your mark and come out the gate strong.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you, guys.